Good afternoon. We'll get started here, and it's my pleasure to introduce Neil Cassidy. Neil Cassidy is from Rolls-Royce, and he is responsible globally for IT and information security. Prior to joining Rolls-Royce, he was Deputy Director of Operations for CERT UK, the National Computer Emergency Response Team. In that role at CERT UK, Neil was responsible for cyber incident handling across the UK critical national infrastructure, as well as being responsible for situational awareness. He brings a wealth of experience in his role as Director of IT Security at Rolls-Royce, and he'll speak with us today about cybersecurity and large complex operations. He probably wins the award for the speaker who's traveled the farthest, having come from England to meet with us today. So I appreciate all of you making it through the snow today and joining us. So Neil.
Thank you. Well, that's ruined my introduction bit when I was going to talk about myself. But yes, where to start? First thing I do need to point out is we don't make cars. So it sounds silly, but we generally have to start presentations with this. There's a couple of colleagues at the back, one of which was invited to a day at Aston Martin. And he thought fantastic, would turn up, play with the cars, pretend to be James Bond. And turned up, and all the other companies there were Mercedes and Toyota. And they kind of, as they go around the table introducing themselves, you kind of realise that they've invited the wrong Rolls-Royce to the day. So we don't make cars. I was going to talk a little bit about what we actually do within Rolls-Royce, because Rolls-Royce is very well known for its engines, for its civil aerospace engines and defence. But we also have some other interesting parts of our business. Power Systems make diesel engines, lots of diesel engines, from anything from Russian oligarch super yachts through to powering half the Chinese submarine fleet. So quite a wide range of both civil and military diesel engines. Our marine business is kind of based out of Norway, and we do everything bar build ships. So we will design them, we design and manufacture most of the deck equipment on them as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these areas a little bit later, in terms of where they're going and the issues that it brings for cybersecurity and having to protect the data on there. We also have a nuclear business, which is split into two. We provide a lot of components and services into civil nuclear power stations, as well as building nuclear power plants for submarines, which is a fairly sensitive area. So we do quite a lot. It's more than just the engines that take us all on holiday every year, and the engines that sit in the back of fast jets. So it's a quite a wide and varied company. In terms of the scale of the estate, there are some things on here that, from a cybersecurity point of view, generally scare me witless, to be honest. It's things like there are 105 plus third-party connections into our network. The plus tells me we probably don't know exactly how many, which is a concern in itself. But it's a large global network. It's got well over 50,000 users. If you include all our contractors, we're probably up to near 70,000 people globally. We have offices in around 50 countries. We operate out of 120 odd countries. So largely, if you consider every time a plane lands, we probably have some people on the ground able to service it. They need access to the data, and somehow we need to provide it to them, which can be a real challenge. We've got 5,000 applications that sit on our network to support the engineering activities that we do. The application rationalisation work that's been going on has brought that down from a rather impressive 9,000 to 10,000 just a couple of years ago, down to a modest 5,000, but that's still an awful lot of applications out there. But interesting, we only have 3 internet points of presence. So mostly things come in through one and they go out through 3, which gives us quite a good level of control over our IT estate. So what do we need to protect? You'll be pleased to know I don't use too many bullet points on slides. What do we need to protect? A lot of it's IP. We generate a huge amount of intellectual property within Rolls, and it's the key to the entire company being right at the cutting edge of engineering and manufacturing. So that IP is extremely precious to us. A lot of that information, a lot of that IP is also, especially when you go into the defence world, is controlled data, and whether that's protectively marked by a government or whether it's export controlled or ITAR controlled data. That gives us one or two minor headaches, largely because considerable time ago Rolls-Royce decided that an engine was an engine was an engine. We didn't matter what its application was. So all the back-end manufacturing is all mixed up. So we mix up, or a lot of, for the aerospace side, defence and civil, we mix up all of the kind of manufacturing process and the data at the back end, which causes huge amounts of problems when you're dealing with controlled data and the access control that needs to go around that. So IP, the export control type data, manufacturing know-how is another really key piece of information from us. Some of the IP that we generate, quite frankly, we can barely make it, so good luck if somebody steals it and attempts to do it themselves. But it's that manufacturing know-how is extremely important. How you build some of the things that we do, you know, the fan blades on that the engine that's shown there, you're able to put a double-decker bus on the tip of one of those fan blades and it will hold it. And they are, you know, quarter of an inch thick. They're tiny things really, but spectacularly strong. So how we build those, how we manufacture it, how we put them together, the processes, the quality processes are all exceptionally strong differentiators for us. The other thing that we need to protect really heavily is our services now. So in recent years we've actually tipped over to be probably about half of the revenues in the company come from services rather than original equipment manufacturing. So, and it's a really interesting space because each individual bit of data is largely worthless, but when you put them all together, it suddenly has an inordinate amount of value, and that's something. It's quite hard to get the people who work with this data and own the data to really understand the value of what they're handling on a day-to-day basis. The ability of a threat actor, for example, to disrupt our supply operations or our repair and overhaul operations on the data and the services side is really strong. We use the business model for our engines, at least one of the business models, is very much around power by the hour. It's we get paid when the thing's flying. When it's on the ground, we get no money. So that drives an entire logistics train that will keep that engine in the air. So if you can disrupt that, if you can have people making bad decisions about where they're going to repair things, where the aircraft need to be in order to repair it, then you could really disrupt how Rolls-Royce operates and its profitability. I said I'd talk about a little bit about some of the future things. Our marine business is very, very focused on autonomous shipping, or ship intelligence as they've called it. There is a video that the business showed me. They were very proud of this video, and I watched it, and then when the lights came up they kind of started laughing because I think I'd gone pale and started to shake slightly and sweat a little bit. The video involved having somebody who quite honestly looked about 12, swiping left and right in a kind of a visual, in a virtual space, and ships would change course and majestically sail across the ocean. And if there was a problem, they'd send drones out to fix it. And we kind of sat there thinking, and you want me to protect that? Seriously? It's a 200,000 ton kinetic weapon, and you've got a 12-year-old swiping left and right in virtual space to turn it round. Oh, really? there may have been some more interesting language used at the time, I suspect. But that connected piece is what's really important in there. So we're starting to look at how do we look at things from an end-to-end perspective, not just the individual components. How could you disrupt, how could a threat actor come in and disrupt that, that entire end-to-end operation from, and all the data links that are going back and forwards. The last one is really around, it's really hard to do a presentation on cybersecurity without mentioning cloud or IoT at some point. Rolls-Royce has been doing Internet of Things since before it had a really trendy title. For years we've been taking information and data off the engines when they land and feeding it back across the internet so we can analyse that data. It's our own kind of IoT. But that's growing massively. The amount of data that we take off engines, telemetry data, whether it's diesel engines or aerospace ones, is growing, growing and growing. To the point of the data itself starts to become interesting because you can reverse engineer the performance characteristics, potentially, of that engine, which is an interesting thing to try and do. But also, we run a lot of services off that kind of IoT thing. It's just becoming huge, and we need to be able to protect that. And typically in that space, it all ends up going into a cloud, and they want to do a big data solution. We lose control, and it's just horrendous. So you'll be aware of all of these kind of things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the threats to the company and where we see them. So we see lots and lots of things in the news around cyber attacks, etc. One of the things if you talk to senior people within companies, is they see all that stuff, but they never think it happens to them. It always happens to somebody else. And also it just doesn't seem real to them. It's not something that they're used to seeing, and they don't believe it. They're like, it's just newspaper stories. It's just made up. But actually, we see a lot of it. We see a lot of very sophisticated cyber attacks on Rolls-Royce on a very, very regular basis. Yes?
Trying to achieve that reality perspective, you hear about the breaches, but I think it's sometimes hard to visualize the consequences. Anything you've seen that reflects the consequences on companies going out of business or the impact of intellectual property being stolen? I mean, have you seen things on that at all that you can share?
I have. I'm just trying to work out how to share it. So it's extremely difficult. The consequences of losing data and IP is extraordinarily difficult to cost, because ultimately it comes down to a cost to the business, whether it's a cost now or a future cost. So really, really hard. We've had to do it a couple of times where we've played out a scenario and then we've attempted to cost it. It's expensive. We looked at, let's take one of the scenarios we looked at was some malware getting in. So something like CryptoLocker arriving on one of our core enterprise systems for engineering, which then makes it unusable. How long would it take us to get it back up and running? Go restore from backups. This is going to take, it's going to take a number of days to identify how big the problem is, how it got in, fix it, clean it, restore from a backup, get that working, get all the data back in. It's going to take, as a minimum, it's going to take a number of weeks. The cost of just a couple of weeks of an outage of one of our key systems, we measured in hundreds of millions of pounds worth of lost, of cost, I suspect is probably the best way of putting it, whether that's lost revenue from not being able to ship components or systems out the door, through to fines from customers for not hitting order targets. So if you start putting all of that together, it starts to become really expensive. We also did a longer term one on on full-on IP theft. And that scenario played out over a much longer period of time, and that was measured in billions of pounds sterling. So there were big numbers. When we did that, it did get quite a lot of attention from the senior board members, strangely. And it does focus the attention quite strongly in that space. We've also had experience with third-party companies and supporting some of those when they've had breaches, and trying to understand how that's damaged their company and revenues as well, which is a bit more difficult to get into. But does that kind of...
It does a lot, because a lot of what you see if you do a casual search is the Pokemon research, where they have it down per record. But that doesn't tell you the pain that you go through if you have an intellectual property breach.
When we were costing those particular scenarios, the cost of the breach in terms of the cleanup activities and the remediation activities within the IT space was discounted because it was so pitifully small. Because they only really wanted to deal in large clumps of sort of 50 million plus.
And now, one more question, I'll be quiet for a while.
No, it's great.
So, have you had any luck finding insurance companies, cyber insurance companies, that would cover the bigger problems of the intellectual property and supply chain disruption?
We haven't. So I'm not a big fan of cyber insurance. I'm not sure what the corporate line is, but personally, not a big fan of it. It's not something we've actively pursued at all. I always struggle with the when would it ever pay aspect. You can always find something that says, you didn't quite do that right, and therefore we're not paying out. So I struggle with the insurance side of it. What we do is essentially we self-insure by investing. And we'd rather invest that money in protecting our IP and our assets than paying for insurance. I think it also has a tendency to potentially drive the wrong behaviour as well. So instead of actually protecting the IP, you just go, I've got insurance, I'm fine, I won't bother. And that doesn't work for us. So back to some of our threat actors. One of the ones on here, the picture in the bottom left-hand corner, is one of the things that does keep us awake at night. Not that person specifically, but the insider threat aspect is huge for us. If you're operating in 120 countries globally, it becomes a major issue. And that's something we're trying to start to tackle a lot more, a lot stronger over the next 12 months than we've been doing. If you've not seen the pictures of the car, I know we don't make cars, as I pointed out at the start, but the pictures of the cars, one's a Range Rover made in the UK, and the other one's a complete copy that was, I think it hit the market about a month after the one from Range Rover came out, and strangely made in China. So interesting space. I use this chart quite a lot. I apologise for the slightly amateurish nature of some of the slides. I'm in a corporate central function. I'm not a salesman. I don't have a glossy marketing department that's going to turn these into a thing of beauty. Unfortunately, these are things that I probably drew. I use this slide quite a lot to just to help people understand that the threat isn't the same everywhere you go. And our different businesses have very different threat profiles. Our primary and our biggest threat is, we term it nation state, but to be honest, it's a well-funded, sophisticated actor intent on economic espionage and IP theft. They're the ones that really we're worried about. You might wonder why the arrow is pointing sideways, which means it's not increasing. We think it's actually at a fairly straight level at the moment. It's because we have observed a levelling off or even a slight reduction in attempted attacks since the UK, China and the the US-China economic espionage pact of just over a year ago. So yeah, it was an emotional journey just to move the arrows from pointing upwards to sideways, but we got there in the end. So yeah, nation state, the advanced persistent threat, which is a terrible title but is used a lot. They are persistent. They're definitely persistent, definitely playing the long game. We see them trying to probe, trying to test all the different parts of our business so they can get in somewhere and then move laterally to where they actually want to get to, and the particular bit of IP that threat actor group's after. We've seen an awful lot more in the last 12 to 18 months, if not maybe 2 years, of attacks against our supply chain. And some of those attacks are very, very sophisticated, where we've seen them sit on our supply chain, looking at pattern of life, looking how we interact with that supplier company, and then they'll mimic that and spoof it and send things across with a bit of extra special sauce in the back. So some fairly sophisticated attacks. It's been an interesting ride. Organised crime is definitely on the increase. We've seen a huge increase over the last 12 months of organised crime hitting us, and it's becoming so much more sophisticated. It used to be relatively straightforward. You could either block it, you knew what it was, you can stop it running on endpoint, all works really well. We will see a campaign where we'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of emails coming in, and all the malware is different, ever so slightly different on every single email that comes in. So it's impossible for any of the traditional kind of indicator-based defences to be effective in that space. Hacktivist community, the people after that single issue, not a massive concern for us. They don't tend to have very sophisticated capabilities. It's more of a concern around defence and nuclear, which are the ones where people tend to have a more ethical problem with those markets. Terrorism is an interesting space. We are kind of watching it very closely because the capability of some of the terrorist groups, although not fantastic at the moment, is improving. And we're just kind of watching where it goes and seeing how that plays out at the moment. But at the moment, we're not too worried. And as I kind of pointed out before, the insider threat's huge and increasing. And we're finding that the insider threat from a specific malicious actor manifests itself in a number of ways, which could be anything from people buying the real estate next door, and then going really traditional, old school, as I would call it, and actually just trying to subvert people to do their job for them. Yes, sir? What's the colours represent? If it's red, it's high. If it's green, it's kind of a low threat. And then the position of the arrow is whether we think it's increasing or it's...
Could you talk a little bit more about the supply chain, why it's not increasing, or like, I guess an issue?
In this, it's a good question. We don't have a great sight of our supply chain, like most people don't. You have a contractual relationship with them, so we see an amount of stuff which kind of correlates to what we see, but we don't see everything. So it's really hard. This is just our assessment. So it's very difficult to have a sort of omnipresent view as to exactly what's happening. We get bits and pieces. We don't think it's getting worse, but it probably peaked. So it probably changed about 2 years ago, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
As you deal with your partners, let's pick on the supply chain. How much are you able to share in terms of different attacks that each other tells you? You know, is everyone being full and open disclosure on what's happened to us, and maybe we can help you? And
good question. I'd love to say yes. It's really difficult because nobody wants to report this stuff. Nobody wants to be said, put their hand up and go, yeah, we're in trouble. So we don't get it. It's definitely what we're trying to do a lot more of. We know we need to do it. We are, over the last 12 months, we've started a program of work to start looking at the security posture of our supply chain. So, but it's a big piece of work. We've got 15,000 companies in Rolls-Royce's supply chain globally. We figured that was probably a too large a number to hit like straight out the box. So we thought, well, here's a good trick. We'll find out which ones have got the real high-end IP or the protected marked material or the export control, the stuff we really care about. I was hoping for a number around the 50 to 100 companies mark. 1,700 companies came back who have some very, very sensitive IP for us. So we're trying to work out how we actually deal with that, but we're starting that process. And it's one of the things, sat at the back, one of the guys from the Rolls-Royce team, now looking slightly embarrassed, so you can tell which one it is. He's our head of our global security operations. So it's on his list of things as to how we actually share what we see with our ecosystem of both partners, suppliers, and indeed customers. And we're trying to look at ways we can do that in an automated way, in an effective way. So that was trying to give a bit of an idea of the landscape in which we're working and the threat landscape, and it's been challenging over the last few years. So we've kind of developed a strategy over the last year, which has been really interesting to develop a strategy that actually encompasses not only the technology that we need to support it across the estate, but also the people that we need to recruit, the processes that we're going to follow, the way we're going to need the business to change, the way it behaves. And we've pulled all that together in a strategy, and this is what we're going to do. It's fantastic when somebody comes to put pressure on your budget to take some of it off, because I can turn around and say, well, you can reduce the budget, but if I don't do that, then all of the rest of this falls apart. Now, if you're really happy to go back and tell the Rolls-Royce board that you've just done that, then feel free. At which point they kind of go and look somewhere else to shave some money off a budget, which is great. But that wasn't actually the reason for doing it. So what we did in terms of to develop this, we kind of looked at the threat landscape. We've been through the threat actors. We know who they are. The attack sophistication is increasing. We know that. We can see it. We observe it. We feel it on some days. Our attack surface is getting much, much bigger. So there's a huge drive to reduce cost within business. The IT cost is huge. Certainly within Rolls-Royce, it is a very, very large number. So there's a drive to use more cloud-based services. That introduces almost an exponential increase in your attack surface. The more we link with other companies, the more we use collaborative tools to increase productivity, the more our attack surface increases, and the more sleepless nights I get to have. So our approach is kind of three-pronged, really. One is around visibility, so we're putting an awful lot more tooling in place to give us the visibility across our network of what's happening. And that's really key, because without that we're completely blind as to what's going on. Enforcement, there's a lot of noise on big corporate estates. You know, we put some new technology on in the last couple of months, and we're finding all sorts of things. You know. And generally speaking, they're for legitimate use, although we did find some password crackers on our network. We're struggling with the justification of, I forgot my password, therefore I downloaded a password cracker. Could have just phoned the help desk. It would have been much simpler. So enforcing the policy is a lot stronger, and it gets rid of a lot of the noise, and it means any of the anomalous behaviour we can start to see, and it stands out a little bit more. And intelligence, we not only using external intelligence, whether that comes from government agencies, or from private companies who do research in this space, but also intelligence off our own network, and understanding what good looks like, understand what normal looks like, so we can see what abnormal looks like. And that's really important for us. Yes. Sir.
Can you talk a little bit more about your enforcement policies and how is that a challenge in different, I guess because you guys are like so diverse in different states and countries, how is that like the policies affected by these different areas?
It's a long and slow process of going through it. Most of the regulatory stuff that we need to do is reasonably well understood. The issues come when various countries bring in some new legislation very quickly, but typically, and a lot of those countries have had almost clauses that will talk around multinational companies and saying if you're a multinational company you don't need to comply with this, which is extremely useful. So both Russia and China have recently brought out new legislation around private data of Russian and Chinese citizens, and it has to be stored in country. You think, well, we have a global HR system, it's not stored in China or Russia. But actually there is a line in there that says if you're a multinational company, that's okay, you can store it wherever you want. So it's not too bad at that level. One of the issues is when you start to enforce, when you start to put technical enforcement in place, when you've had a policy for a while but you've not been able to technically enforce it, and it could be something really simple like only ever use an encrypted USB stick. The moment you enforce it, you'll find 15,000 people screaming because they discovered that they didn't have to have an encrypted USB stick, and therefore they've been using a non-encrypted one for a long time, and it's got all their stuff on, and now it won't work, and they scream very loudly. So we have to, the aim is not to break the business. We still need the business to operate, so therefore we have to walk very slowly through turning that enforcement dial up and making sure that we protect.
Do you guys simulate some of these policies as well too? I mean, like before you actually enforce them? Go ahead and use your microphone, please.
Do you simulate some of these policies before you enforce them?
We haven't had the capability to do that.
Okay.
Up to now. We are starting to with some of the technology that we're putting in place, so we can start to simulate what changes will look like.
I think the model in the other room was if you ask a question, please use the microphone so that the recording can capture it.
Cool. So, like any reasonably mature company in this space, we have a quite a extensive defence in depth model, which isn't just the technical side, but also the education programs, the training and awareness programs for the staff, as well as the policy set on the other side. So some of the things we're trying to do, a lot more compliance monitoring and compliance style monitoring, and we don't do anywhere near enough of that, which is where a lot of the enforcement will come from, and getting the processes right around that enforcement. So enforcement doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do something. It might be actually we inform somebody's line manager that they're not doing something appropriate, and it's their job to then talk to them. So it could be as something as simple as that. We're investing in a cyber analytics platform. We've kind of been using a number of tools, and it's quite fragmented, and we're trying to bring that together into one place, bring in some analyst capability into Rolls-Royce with our Rolls-Royce staff, so that we can start to be a bit more reactive in terms of what's happening across the network, but also a lot more proactive in terms of just looking for bad things that are happening. We're looking for people who are curious about just stuff that happens on networks and goes, I don't like the look of that, I'm going to spend a day just trying to find out what's going on, and then giving them the tools to be able to do that. So that's going to be an interesting journey for us. It also being able to do that means we start to be able to support some of the non-traditional IT areas of the business. So we've been asked to secure our Internet of Things, for example. Well, where do you start? Quite honestly, but actually, if I can get them to produce data, we can put it into a cyber analytics platform. We can analyze it. We can look for patterns. We can work it out. So if I haven't got that, where do I even start? Industry 4.0 activities that we're doing. So trying to improve our production lines in terms of their efficiency. So over the last year, we've had with our civil large engines, we've had to go from producing 1 a week to 7 a week. So from 1 a week to 1 a day, which is a huge increase in tooling. It's a huge increase in the supply chain because all these engines are still made by hand. If you wanted to improve that throughput, you want to be able to analyse your flow lines in your factories. If you want to do that, typically people will plug it into the internet, stick it off to a cloud analytics platform and play, because there are some really good tools out there to do that, but they're all in somebody else's cloud. Now the thought of connecting our production lines to the internet does worry me quite a lot. You know, it'd be very easy for somebody then to start turning off machine tooling on a production line and bringing our production lines to a complete halt. So how do I protect that? Again, one of the ways of finding out is to start using our cyber analytics platform to identify what we can and can't do. And also the containment part of there is an incident in something like that is completely different to being in an IT incident. So if there's a problem on somebody's laptop, we can pull them off the network. It's one person, it makes no difference. But if that device is a piece of machine tooling on a production line, I can't pull it off the network, I can't stop it, because it could cost the company absolutely hundreds of millions of pounds. So I need to be able to contain that in a different way and deal with it when I've got the suitable downtime in the production run, if that makes sense. Behavioural analysis is something we're really pushing ahead with this year. We've kind of dabbled a little bit over the last few years with it, but it's a really interesting space. There's some really, really cool tools out there to go play with. We're looking at both the network behaviour and the user behaviour on this. And the user behaviour is extremely interesting. I've sat through a number of briefs from sort of Oxford University when they do lots and lots of work on insider threat and what indicators you can look for to identify when somebody's doing something wrong on the network. And it's great, but you can't do anything with it. You can't do anything with it until they actually do something wrong. Otherwise you're targeting an individual, and the HR function gets very upset with me. So it's a really interesting space, but one we're really going to push on with this year. User education and awareness, you just can't do enough. It's the first line of defence in any company. I'd love to be able to stand there when people say, how many people have you got in the security function? I'd say about 55,000. Unfortunately, it's not quite like that at the moment. You know, phishing has been the #1 vector for attacks for I don't know how many years, 15, 20, since the internet started. I can't really. It's and it doesn't change because it focuses on our general desire to help other people. So really easy to spoof and click on a link. We've done quite a lot with our board as well. So we've been running exercises, so cyber exercise with the board. Very interesting when you start doing those. But so it's business continuity exercise. Yes, to some extent it is, but it's a really different one. So most businesses will have business continuity plans that look at sites, individual sites. You give them a cyber attack that is cross-site, cross-country, multi-country issues to resolve. Suddenly all the existing plans don't work anymore. They just don't work. So we have to rethink how we actually react and respond to those type of incidents, which has been a really interesting exercise. So we've been sort of working our way down from the top. So we've kind of exercised with the board. We're doing some of the leadership teams within the operating divisions and coming down. And we're going to start to run a lot more communications out with people, so they can understand, and the staff can understand what we do as a security function to protect them, and the kind of things that we see. Just keep drip feeding that information in on a really regular basis. And supplier assurance is something as well that we're really trying to do this year, which I talked about earlier. So I think that was it. It was a bit of a rattle through. So are there any other kind of questions anybody's got? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering if you have done any, say, analysis on during particularly in financial crisis, how it affects the behavior, or what happens in one way or the other in the cybercrime and the behavior of the companies and the individuals during the financial crisis, particularly. I don't know if you had any data from 2008.
I think we would struggle to go back to 2008 to find some data, it has to be said. You do get changes in behaviour from staff when various events happen. And it can be quite predictable. So when annual reports come out and it's pay time and bonuses, you know that everyone's going to rush to particular sites to look for information. And we get a lot of we observe that a lot of the threat actors use events and press announcements to craft their phishing emails into us. So if we regularly make big press announcements at air shows or trade shows about new deals being signed, we will then get a flood of campaigns that will come in related to that. Or a big contract announcement with the government, we'll get a flood of campaigns that are related to that. I don't think we're quite at the point of being able to predict that and then warn people that that's likely to happen, unfortunately. So I don't think I've got a particularly good answer to your question, but
No, I mean, because it is completely unpredictable, but say the first one was long-term capital management, which was around year 99, and then it was just a small problem comparing to what happened in 2008. And the next one is probably, the magnitude is going to be much, much bigger. And then because of the money situation, because everything is right now mostly virtual, how does it affect the companies and their relationships? And sometimes if they are forced to do something, maybe they don't go with the enforcement.
So all companies, when we went through the financial crisis, had to reduce their costs and their cost base somewhere. So certainly within Rolls-Royce, we've been really good at trying to protect the security side of it because of what we do. We thrive off the engineering and the IP, so we have to protect that, and that's driven all the way down from the board. So we don't see from my perspective, we don't see a huge change in behaviour when things like that happen around the world. If that makes sense.
Well, it's too complicated. I don't expect you to answer the whole thing.
You showed a lot of IDSs and like intrusion detection systems and different tools you're using. So can you talk about how accurate they are right now? So like the breaches that occurred and were these systems able to detect them earlier? So like how was the accuracy of them?
It's almost an impossible question to answer because we don't know what we don't know. So if it misses something, we'll never know it's missed it.
Yeah, but all the known breaches. So like the breach happened, but like it didn't show up on the IDS, or it did show up?
It's because of the layered nature of what we've got, we tend to find it at some point. At the very worst case, we will pick it. We'll pick up malware when it tries to beacon out, and that's probably the latest point we're comfortable. So when it first starts beaconing out, we're pretty good at being able to identify it, and we can stop it at that point. If it gets further than that, you're into a major incident, and you probably wouldn't want to kick out the bad guy straight away, because that could be quite dangerous. But in terms of accuracy of systems, it's pretty good, and you have to balance it across the false positive rate. So you could detect everything, but your operations team will do nothing but triage false positives, and then they get really bored because they're doing too many false positives and they miss one of the important ones. So it's getting that balance right, and we're pretty good at it actually. We don't miss a lot, he says.
And we also use like honeypots or something of that sort to like attract attackers to try and attack this. And
we don't actually. We've been thinking about it, and it's kind of one of those things we'd quite like to do, but we haven't quite got the time to do it at the moment. To some extent, we are a massive honeypot. So, it's kind of interesting when you get the marketing spiel about you've got to improve your cyber response capability. The industry average is 180 days or whatever the latest figure is between infection and containment or something like that. We do that in about 3 hours globally. So between something landing on our network, we can have it blocked and contained across the entire group within about 3 hours. It has been as quick as 40 minutes. I'm not entirely sure how we got it to 40 minutes. Everyone just must have been looking at the right time, and everybody...
Pull the LAN cable.
It's a lot of cables. So,
Neil, a quick question. You mentioned a little bit ago that phishing continues to be a huge error. So I suspect I know part of the answer, but I'd love clarification on, are you guys addressing that through training, or are you addressing it through technical aspects as well to filter this? And the reason I ask that is obviously it's a question or a problem that everybody is dealing with. But almost exactly 9.5 years ago from right now was our last Rolls-Royce guest speaker at the seminar, and he gave the very first spell out of an attack that came through phishing, and it was one of the very first detailed cases I heard about it, and since then you obviously hear about it daily.
So all of those. So we've got quite a good technical setup that will strip things out. We get around 90 million emails delivered into Rolls-Royce every month. We deliver about 5 to 6 million on to the end user.
Wow.
It's something of that order of magnitude. So that's how much stuff gets blocked and dropped. And some changes in technology that we put in probably about this time last year. So we've been running for about a year now. We're doing a lot more. We're picking up a lot more than we did before. So a lot of stuff that would have come through under our old setup is now blocked. We're doing a lot on user education as well. So when people join, there's a mandated training course that a part of it is not solely on phishing, but part of it is around things to be aware. We run kind of communication campaigns internally. And the one thing I didn't really want to say, just in case anybody else who works at Rolls-Royce, we're about to start running internal phishing scams. But I didn't want to say that just in case anybody sees this later on and then they're ready for it. So that might spoil it. So if you just want to edit that bit out, that'd be great.
Have you done those in the past where you've
run
an internal?
Yeah, we've done them in the past, and it was quite a spectacularly high click rate. rather worryingly, for a very poor email.
I would be interested, I mean, obviously we'll not do it in a public forum like this, but other companies who have done this have reported that, you know, they do those, they find who the offenders were, they do a training, they put out
Yep.
information, they put the posters up around the company, and 6, 7 months later, they do it and they find it's the same people.
Same people.
And so I'm interested if you found a way to actually increase better response amongst the people you're trying to train, your repeat offenders. I guess that's not really a question, more of a comment. I apologize.
Yeah, we haven't, because we're not quite there yet. I do know of one company that has a bit of a 5 strikes and you're out. So they run those scams, internal scams, and the first time you click on it, you get the kind of "don't do that again" kind of message. The second time it goes to your manager. And the third time it's kind of a verbal warning. 4th time it's a formal written warning, and the 5th time you're shown the door. And that can focus the mind. Possibly not where we will go with it, but it's really hard. It would be nice to actually understand who certain individuals have a greater propensity to click on links, whether they're more helpful than others. I click on nothing, funny old thing. People think I'm very unhelpful. So there must be a way, I think, of being able to, once you can identify those people, is you can treat them slightly differently on the network. So you may well have them in a more controlled group in terms of what they can browse the internet with. So there are other ways you can encourage people for the right behaviour, which is actually you'd start taking some privilege off them. And that has added benefits. If you're somebody who's likely to click on a malicious link, actually, if you've got no internet access, you're not going anywhere. So,
Thank you.
Okay,
Cool.
if there's nothing else, we'll,
Nope.
got one?
Have you had detection of attacks on your production?
Go ahead and use your microphone.
Have you had detection of attacks on your production machinery?
So detection on the production machinery, not targeted attacks. If we have an incident on there, and we had, I do recall one last year, where anyone just found an awful lot of malware that's been introduced by people passing data around using USB sticks. But we've not observed anything so far that's specifically targeted.
That you know of.
That we know of. I choose words very carefully. Cool. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.